I am 73 years old, and it took me 50 years to understand that the loudest lives are often the emptiest. I spent half a century chasing a ghost called impact. I wanted to be a giant. I wanted my name carved in stone. I wanted the world to notice my absence. But the world is wide, and stone eventually turns to dust. We are taught that to matter, we must be extraordinary. We must be visible. We chase the spotlight. We build monuments of ego. But standing here, in the quiet of this room, I see the truth. The light doesn't come from the stage. It comes from the candle on your table. It doesn't scream, it just burns. It provides warmth to the one person sitting next to it. I wasted decades trying to light up the horizon, only to realize that the only horizon that matters is the one within my reach. To be different is not to be famous. It is to be real in a world of masks. We have become a generation of performers, acting for an audience that isn't even truly watching us. We mistake visibility for importance, not realizing that being seen is often just a golden cage that keeps us from being ourselves. I spent so many years measuring my worth by the nods of strangers, and the number of hands reaching out to shake mine, where every smile was a transaction and every word was a calculation. We are so afraid of being invisible, yet there is a secret the shadows keep that the light will never understand. In the dark, you do not have to perform, and you are finally allowed to be who you are without the weight of expectations. The more eyes you invite into your life, the less of that life actually belongs to you, because you trade your inner peace for their fleeting attention. It is a terrible bargain that we all make in the hope of feeling significant. I look at the mirror now and I do not see a legend or a failure. I see a man who has finally taken off his armor and realized how heavy it was to carry. For decades, I wore it to impress people who were too busy wearing their own armor to notice mine. True sight begins only when you stop caring if you are seen by those who are also blind to their own nature. There is a profound freedom in being forgotten by the world, for it is only then that you can finally remember yourself. We are told that a life without a title is a life wasted, a quiet tragedy of a man who never quite made it to the stage. The world demands that we all be protagonists or conquerors whose names are etched on some grand marquee for everyone to admire. But if you look closely at the hands that actually built the world around you, you will see they were never famous hands. They were scarred, calloused, and entirely anonymous hands that did the heavy lifting while the cameras were pointed elsewhere. There is a silent, almost sacred dignity in the person who wakes before the sun, not to be seen by the crowd, but because they have a duty to those they love and a responsibility to the day ahead. Stoicism is not found in the grand gestures of the battlefield, but in the courage to be ordinary and to stand in a small kitchen washing a dish with the same quiet focus as a monk in prayer. We often feel like we are failing if we are not moving the needle of history. But history is a cold mother who forgets the names of nearly everyone eventually. The soul, however, remembers the integrity of the hours spent doing what was right when the reward was nothing but silence. You do not need to save the world to be a hero. You only need to be the person who stays, who listens, and who remains honest in the forgotten corners of existence. The ordinary is not a prison. It is the only place where truth actually lives. There is a peculiar comfort in the realization that we will never truly know the full extent of our influence on the world. We tend to focus on the large and visible waves we create. Yet we often ignore the quiet ripples that start with a single, unassuming act of kindness or a moment of genuine presence. Imagine a pebble dropped into a vast, dark lake. You see the initial splash, but your eyes cannot follow where the rings finally touch the shore. You might have saved a life 20 years ago. just by offering a seat or a shared silence to a stranger who was standing on the edge of despair, and you likely went home that evening thinking nothing of it. This is the Stoic truth of our interconnectedness, where our duty is not to manage the grand outcomes of our lives, but to ensure that each small action is rooted in virtue. We are nodes in a web that stretches far beyond our vision. And every time we choose patience over anger or truth over convenience, we send a pulse through that web that outlasts our own breath. The things that matter most are often the ones we forget because they were so natural to us, yet they became the foundation upon which someone else built their entire future. We do not need to see the end of the ripple to know that the water has moved, for the weight of a life is measured not by the noise it makes, but by the quiet peace it leaves behind in others. I once believed that life was a mountain to be climbed, a series of peaks that would eventually lead to a place where I could finally rest and say that I had arrived. The horizon is a trick of the light. The further you walk, the further it recedes, leaving you exhausted and empty in a landscape you never took the time to truly see. We treat the present moment like a hallway we must hurry through to reach the next room, ignoring the texture of the walls and the warmth of the floor beneath our feet. The soul does not live in your accomplishments or your plans for tomorrow. It lives only in the narrow, breathing space of right now. To be present is the ultimate act of rebellion in a world that profits from your distraction, for it is the only time you are truly alive and free from the chains of your own ego. I sit here now, watching the dust motes drift in the late afternoon sun, and I realize that this moment is not a means to an end. It is the end itself, a complete and perfect universe contained within a single, indrawn breath. You do not need to be anywhere else to find your soul. You only need to stop running long enough for it to catch up with you. There is a quiet power in the things that no one will ever know you did. We have become so accustomed to the spotlight that we feel a virtuous act is wasted if it is undocumented or praised by the crowd. But the Stoics knew that the only true witness you ever need is your own character, and that virtue is its own reward, requiring no audience to make it real. I look at the small repairs in this room, the places where I fixed a broken hinge or polished a forgotten surface when I was completely alone in the middle of the night. No one thanked me for those moments, and no one saw the effort they required. And that is exactly why those actions carry the most weight in my heart. Virtue is like a deep root. It does its most important work in the dark, where the light cannot reach, and where the praise of men cannot corrupt its purpose. When you do something good and tell no one, you are building a kingdom within yourself that no one can ever take away or diminish. You are no longer a beggar for approval, searching for validation in the eyes of others. Instead, you become the king of your own soul, content to be the only one who knows the truth of your integrity. It is the secret kindness, the silent sacrifice, and the hidden discipline that truly define who we are when the masks are finally set aside. We spend our days looking through windows into lives we were never meant to lead, watching the polished highlights of strangers and feeling the weight of our own quiet rooms like a failure. It is a modern sickness to compare our internal chaos with the external order of others, not realizing that we are looking at a stage play while living in the messy reality of the backstage. I used to look at the men who moved faster than me, who climbed higher and spoke louder, and I felt as though my life was a draft that I had forgotten to finish. But comparison is a thief that steals the present moment and replaces it with the ghost of someone else's luck, leaving you poor in a house full of riches. Look at the objects on my table. They are not the best in the world, and they carry the scars of decades of use, but they are mine and they fit the shape of my hand perfectly. Your life is not a race against the world, it is a solitary walk with your own soul. And every minute you spend looking at someone else's path is a minute you have lost on your own. There is no such thing as being behind in life, because there is no single finish line we are all running toward. The only person you should ever strive to be better than is the person you were yesterday. For everyone else is merely a distraction from the sacred work of becoming who you truly are. I have lived long enough to see the strongest monuments crumble and the most prestigious awards lose their luster in the back of a dusty closet. We are obsessed with what we leave behind, the money, the titles, the structures we built as if these things could somehow keep our memory warm when we are gone. But the truth is far simpler and much more beautiful than any physical legacy we could ever hope to construct. People will eventually forget the specific words you spoke, and they will certainly forget the purchasing you spent your life polishing like a trophy. What they will never forget is how they felt in your presence, and whether your soul gave them a reason to believe in their own. I look at these old chairs in my room and I do not see furniture. I see the ghosts of conversations where I actually listened instead of just waiting for my turn to speak. I see the moments when I offered a hand or a quiet nod that gave someone the strength to keep going for one more day when they were ready to give up. That is the only legacy that has any true weight in the end, and it is not something you can write on a resume or carve into a headstone. It is an invisible warmth you leave in a room long after you have walked out of it. You are not a collection of facts or a list of successes. You are the impact you had on the hearts of those you touched, and that impact is the only thing that truly outlasts the grave. There is a clarity that comes only when the sun begins to dip below the horizon for the very last time, and the shadows in your room grow long and heavy. When you realize that the space you are standing in might be the final room you ever inhabit. The metrics of the world suddenly seem like a foreign language you no longer care to translate. The bank balances, the social standings, and the noisy applause of the crowd all dissolve into a thin, meaningless mist that carries no weight in the silence of the evening. In the end, you are left with nothing but the raw contents of your own character and the memory of how you treated the people who had absolutely nothing to offer you in return. The final metric of a life is not how much you took or how much you managed to hoard, but how much of your own light you were willing to share without the hope of being remembered for it. I look at the old clock on the wall, and I no longer fear the steady, rhythmic ticking of the seconds. I only hope that when the hands finally stop, they rest on a heart that was honest and a soul that was brave enough to be simple. The end is not a judgment delivered by the world or a headline in a newspaper. It is a quiet, private conversation between you and the silence of the life you chose to lead. I am 73 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am not trying to be anything other than what I am. The noise of the world has finally faded into a distant hum, and the heavy burden of becoming has been replaced by the simple grace of being. We spend our entire lives feeling like we are a problem to be solved or a project to be completed, never realizing that the target we were aiming for was right beneath our feet all along. You are enough, not because of what you have done or what you will do, but because you are a part of this ancient, breathing universe that requires no justification for its existence. I watch the candle on my table flicker one last time, and I feel a peace that the younger version of myself would have called defeat. But I now know it is the ultimate victory. To be at home in your own skin and to be content with a quiet room and a clear conscience is the highest form of success. My name may be forgotten and my house may fall to ruin, but in this moment I am whole and I am here. That is all that ever truly mattered. We are but a breath in the dark, a brief spark between two eternities. And there is no need to scream into the void when you can simply sit and enjoy the light. The search is over because the seeker has finally come home.